What would you do if a man asked you to help him live forever? Well, you could tell him it's impossible. You could tell him that all men die someday. But what if you did know of a way to access a fountain of youth, of sorts, a way to exist even beyond one's death? Well, then you may feel responsible to help the man. It's not a fountain at all. It's not a secret elixir sought out by treasure hunters halfway across the world. It's right inside of each and every one of us. It's the ability to tell our life story to our children. But what if you felt your story was never fully told, and suddenly you didn't have the ability to tell it? Well, then you might need to find a treasure hunter to go on a long, challenging journey to find your fountain of youth for you. Or you could just call up your grandson, who will quickly realize he's in way over his head. But now I really am getting ahead of myself. We need to go back in time to the beginning, to when this adventure first began.
Name's Edward LoCascio.
This is my grandfather, Poppy. For years he had asked me to visit his house in St. Augustine, Florida, so he can tell me his life story. Oh boy, when I hear the word St. Augustine, Florida, all together in one sentence, I picture retired older people, khaki shorts, and bingo. Not something I was running to do. I was in college, and I only really had time to tell him to write his story down. Make it like a book I can read later. Pop wasn't pleased by this. He told me he didn't know how to write it, claiming he wasn't great with words. He made me promise that I would fly down to Florida to record his story. I promised I would, at some point. Many months passed since I have seen him. Finally, I am in Florida with my father and my sister on a short and unrelated trip. Pop has called my father and is planning to visit us at our hotel. At this point, I figure he has forgotten about his plans to record his life story and my massive involvement in them. I hate to admit it, but I'm happy about this. I know how much time a project like that would take. He must be writing it instead. Whew! Great, I'm off the hook. Then, very suddenly, everything changes. A troubling phone call. I hear and understand for the first time that Pop is very seriously ill, and he can't even make the journey by car to come see us at our hotel. Pop has cancer. Then, in a wave of thoughts, I realize if he doesn't have the energy to even come here, how would he have the strength to write the many words of his life story he so desperately wanted to tell me down on paper? Words he had trouble penning even when he was healthy. In stark contrast to the cool breeze and beautiful view on this beach, and in this moment, I'm hit with a harsh and painful reality. I now have a choice. Our link to the past, my grandfather was running out of time to tell his life story, the one he had made me promise to record, and I was the only person he had ever asked to tell it. But did I have the skill to put it all together? Would I even know how? I decide that I have to keep my promise. I have to tell Pop's story for him. After returning home, I devise a plan. Using the camera, sound, editing, and animation technology available to me, I'll work as hard as I can to bring Pop's story fully to life. Only problem was, well, I was pressed for time. I boarded a small plane with my two sisters to St. Augustine, Florida, en route to begin to tell my grandfather's story. As the orange glow of the early morning sun hits the seats in front of me, I think about the vast desert I'm beginning to cross. This mental desert reminds me of Pop's all-time favorite film. I remember he once told me it was Lawrence of Arabia. He said he related to the struggle of the protagonist in the story. I'd always wondered if he was implying his life was like that of Lawrence of Arabia. But the thought of Fast Eddie in a turban amongst sand dunes just didn't seem right to me at the time. Little did I know, Eddie had lived out his own epic, not amongst sand dunes, but in the streets of Brooklyn, New York. Believe it or not, some knew him as Red Gooch from his days in a street gang. Others just called him Red because of his ridiculously coiffed maroon pompadour. Look at that. I call him Pop, Poppy, or even Fast Eddie because of his charisma and his, well, powerful charm with the ladies. His full name is actually Eduardo Christopher Colombo Giacomino, etc., LoCascio, but I would run out of ink if I needed to type that out every time, frankly. So I think I'll follow suit with Pop's favorite American classic, Lawrence of Arabia. We'll just call the man Ed of Brooklyn.
Yeah. The sidewalk told me the pantaking. He said the road less traveled is for the humble and patient. He said the road carries risks and many broken bridges. It's lined with barbed wire, not some pretty picket fences. And the feet didn't tread over me. No, this focus for roses, and you get these cockroaches and vultures that are supposed to eat you. When the culture defeats you, on your knees screaming peace, dude. See, we seem tall, then we all meet God, and we seem small till we meet these fronts that teach us to sling rocks and sling shots, and we sleep on spring rocks, and they think not, but only do it when it seems hot. Metaphorically simple, story keep it in your mental. Words from my mind to yours, via pen and pencil, via instrumental. Been I'm fucking up your speaker. The sidewalk talk, smart destruction of our lead. The sidewalk talks from Houston to New York, writing words of fine talk from LA to Newport, walking home from school or walking on ball courts. It hears and recounts tales told by all sorts. The sidewalk talks from Houston to New York, writing words of fine talk from LA to Newport, walking home from school or walking on ball courts.
Early in the morning, we arrive in St. Augustine, Florida. I have to admit, I'm anticipating Pop to look a bit slow, maybe even sick. But Pop arrives looking as strong as ever in his sleek new car. I'm even impressed to see how high-tech and hip at the times he is. He calls his wife Marie using a device built into his car.
He's calling Marie.
This is so high-tech.
Yeah.
Well, what I know how to use. Marie, we'll just pick them up and we'll be home, I guess, in a half hour.
All right. Do they drink? Should I make a pot of coffee?
Yes.
Ask them.
Yes, they're coffee.
They all drink it.
They're
Yeah.
LoCascios. They're LoCascios. All right. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
I can't get cheaper help than that.
This was the Fast Eddie that I knew. He still got it. Known as the nation's oldest city, St. Augustine was founded September 1565 by Don Pedro Menendez de Avila. St. Augustine is the longest continually inhabited European-founded city. The areas include more than 4 centuries of landmarks with gift shops. Boy, is there a whole lot of gift shops.
Actually, I like to have that little cannon in my backyard so I can shoot some people I don't particularly like.
We arrive at Pop's home. It's cozy, and it's perfect. Pop is so excited to have me around, he asked me to post a bunch of pictures on his Facebook page. My grandfather was calling in breakfast orders from his sedan and keeping up with his pals on Facebook. I'm now realizing that the only way I'll remotely be able to keep up with Lightning Fast Eddie here and his story is to ask his kids for help. That's right, I need to call in some backup.
I'm Linda Marie LoCascio Krajewski. I'm the oldest of 3. I'm his daughter. All I know is I was mostly sheltered, more so than my brother and sister. They just did everything. He was just a good dad. I mean, he did, he was a great provider. He's achieved a lot. He started at the bottom and wound up with a great position in the housing authority. He was my first hero, and he'll always be my first hero. And it's important to know where you come from and your roots, and he's very big on that.
What do you think about his days as Red Gooch?
Well, of course I wasn't around, and I really don't. He never likes to talk about the meaning of that. I think it had something to do with his upbringing in Brooklyn, and he was a teenager and grew up in Brooklyn, and he spoke of stickball and whatever that he used to play. So I guess his friends called him. I don't really know. He didn't never really explain that. So I don't know about that. The Gooch, Red Gooch, I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
So what really was the true origin story of the infamous Red Gooch? It's time to talk to the man himself to find out.
All right.
Sound rolling, and then I want you to say, this is take 2 now.
All right. Take two. Name is Edward LoCascio.
One big.
Name's Edward LoCascio. On my baptism, it's Eduardo Christopher Colombo Giacchino LoCascio. I was born on Christopher Columbus Day, October 12th, 1930. When I got into my teens and hung out with the rougher boys, they called me Gooch. In fact, Red Gooch. I was born and lived my formative years at 111 Bushwick Avenue, which does not exist anymore. It was a railroad flat. My mother was very intelligent and educated. My father was smart but not educated, and he had some rough edges. And he made the worst wine in the world. And I asked him one time, "Pop, why do you make the worst wine?" He said, "So nobody drinks my wine." Starting from the time we're 9 years old, we had 3 movies in my neighborhood. And that was our entertainment. You had the Grand Street movie, you had the Graham Avenue movie, and you had the Rainbow Theater. And in that order, Grand was not the greatest movie, and Graham was not the greatest, but the Rainbow was a step up. So how we get the movies, the Grand Street, my mother used to give me a nickel or so. We go in there and they would have, you see a movie with cartoons and also the what's happening in the world, the newsreel. And they also would have raffles. They had no business. So they raffle off a bike once a month or this and that. And that was a big thing for kids in those days. Raffle trains, Red Ryder, BB guns. So we would go in there and wait for them. And I looked forward to that, and the movie was 10 cents. So I didn't have enough money. I said, "No, you can't afford that." I get all the deposit bottles. And you know, the milk bottles and soda bottles all had a deposit on them. I cash them in like they were 3 cents a piece, a nickel a piece, and I have my money. I save it up for the whole week. People give me their milk bottles, I cash them in. And that was interesting, because in the movies, we saw a lot of interesting things about the world, different movies. And the first time I saw a colored movie, I think it was The Wizard of Oz. I was astounded. Now, I was about 11 years old when I saw that.
What was your favorite film at that age?
That age, I think there was Buck Rogers.
That was your favorite?
If I was a favorite, because they had like every week they have a different sequence, a continuation. And I would go there and see what happened to Buck Rogers. One time they leave off, they cut it short while the monsters are coming after him from Mars. And I would see next week what happened. Somehow there was no monsters the next week. Yeah? Anyway, I had a kid that lived next to me, Georgie Rogers. He was 13 or 14 years old, but he was a stupid kid playing marbles. I didn't realize. I was about 10 and he was about 13, 14. And I won his marbles. He wouldn't give me his marbles. So we got into a fight. So anyway, he went and called his brother, and his brother's name was Buck Rogers, like in the thing. And he had another Rogers. And they come down, and they was telling me, give him down. Then my brother Danny came home from work, because he was in the military yet. And he started chasing Buck Rogers around a car. When the Second World War broke out, 1941, I was 11 years old, working on my mother's bedroom furniture, making model aeroplanes. Anyway, getting back to my brother, in the Second World War, he went into service. He was in Normandy. He landed in Normandy, D-Day +1. He was in North Africa, and he got 3 Bronze Stars. He was in the field artillery. The war years, I envisioned myself being prepared to go to war, so I would work out with springs. And so my brother sent me home in 1943 a bayonet, a real bayonet. And he sent me home a bazooka shell, but it was void of the powder. Mr. Galino, who lived in a 6-family house upstairs, could not speak English. And he was a little skinny guy, and they made him an air raid board. So he'd take me as his interpreter. And he had a helmet, looked like a piss pot on his head. And we walked around, it was white. And he'd tell me he smoked, constantly smoking. I was 12, 13, so this is 1942, 43. And they gave me a book, airplane spotter book from the government. And I knew all the silhouettes of planes. Of course, they never got here. But I could tell you the name of the airplane from the silhouette. So I would identify. So I'd take him. If he saw a plane, they put the searchlights on. And he'd say, point up to the window with the light. Tell them to shut the lights in Sicilian, he told me. He called up in Sicilian. They were Irish and German people. They didn't know what the hell he was saying. I say, lights out, blackout. And I'd call up. I said, good, good. One of the things I did was work in a florist on a truck with a guy by the name of Fitz. I would go with Fitz, and we'd go and deliver it, and I go in, and they would give me like 20 cents or a quarter tip. That was big money for a 12-year-old kid. That's 1942, the war was going on. But these were like German, there's an enclave of German families. One day Fitz came out, and he was about 28, really a stocky guy, big, broad, real like a stormtrooper type guy. And he said to me one day, hurry up, you little guinea, get in the back of the truck, we gotta go. And he got me mad, but I was only 12 years old. And I said, Fitz, if you're around when I'm 17, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you. I promise you that, so you better not be around. There was an article in the paper a week later that out in Amityville, Long Island, the government discovered, this is 1942, German community was giving signals to submarines offshore. It seems like a joke, but it wasn't, because some of the saboteurs came and landed in Long Island. And I never saw Fitz after that. I did very well in school, even though my parents were, my mother was smart, she'd get me books, so my reading comprehension was excellent. So from age 10, 11, I would get books and go with my friend Aunt Tony Martelli, and he'd come over my house and we walked to the library. And we used to have to go down Grass Street to Leonard Street Library. And we're walking down the street, on the right side, we'd have to pass a pool room. And this guy would come out and yell across, hey, Red, you're going to the library, you fag, and this and that. So what happened is I went across the street, I was going to the library, his name was Angelo, and I proceeded to knock the shit out of Angelo. I knocked them out, and the guys in the pool room that were really a bunch of hoodlums come out and liked me, and all were laughing and all. I became one of their friends. But some of those guys were dangerous. Some of them were older guys, and they had a guy named Sloppy Joe and Kenny. And Sloppy Joe was discharged from the Navy at that time. So I was about 15, and these guys were 18, 19. Now we have gangs forming. And Red Quinn and I was Red Gooch. Both had red hair, and this guy, Red Quinn, was a character. He would go in different neighborhoods with other gangs and start up, then say they attacked him, and we'd have to go there and say, what do you attack one of our guys? So one day we had a gang fight scheduled for Fort Greene Park in Brooklyn, where I found later they interned the remains of all the revolutionary bones, and people don't even know they're in this park. It's a historic park.
Tell me how the gang schedule works. You pencil them in for 3 o'clock on Friday? How does that work? How does the gang schedule work?
We were known as the Comanches, and the other gang that was near the Navy Yard were older, were the Redskin Rumblers.
Tell me how you would schedule a fight.
Well, this guy, Red Quinn, was the guy that always got trouble, so he had the big mouth and go over there and say, oh, we're going to meet in Fort Greene Park on a certain night, and we're going to get our guys, we're going to knock this. All right, we'll meet you there. Okay. So we would go to Fort Greene Park, they would be there. The only thing is, some of my friends in my gang later became policemen and firemen, and some of them became mobsters. So I went there, and I went with this guy, Jerome, that became a cop later, but he was not a fighter. He just tagged along. He was a very fragile guy, and the first thing you knew, he got hit on the head with something, was bleeding. I had to take him to the hospital. But as we were fighting, the Redskin Rumblers were older. They had guys that were in service in combat in the Second World War, was part of their gang. So when they went to fight us, we were 14, 15, 16. They actually picked some of us up and threw us over fences. They were older guys. So eventually, I don't know what happened. My out was, after I had a couple to go around, take Gerard to the hospital because he was bleeding heavy. And Charlie X-Slavin, that was his brother, was Kenny X-Slavin. He comes home one day, and this, I don't like my grandchildren to know, but it's a true fact. He come home to the pool room, and it's 1945. I'm 15 years old. So he came over to us and said, Hey, listen, I got my father's car. You guys want to go for a ride? Yeah, sure. 3 of us and him went for a ride, and he goes the wrong way on East River Drive. So naturally, we're stopped by the police. So they said, let's see your license, and say, I don't have it. Let me see your, I don't like it. It's my father's car. Oh yeah, we'll run a check on the plates. They said, this car is stolen. Wally is under arrest. Now I'm 15 years old. I said, Charlie, you told us this was your father's car. He said, I got no father. My uncle, Amadeo Spidione, got us bailed out and then showed we don't. So he gave the detectives $50 to kill our records, but he never did because I was a juvenile. And that record stayed with me at 15, and that made a lot of damage for me. At 17 and a half, I went into the military. I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. I did go in the Air Force. I wanted to get away from my neighborhood because I knew I was going to get in trouble eventually. But I had a very good-looking girlfriend, and she was like 15 or 16. She looked like 20, and at that age, that really was very important to me. Anyway, I was in a gang and started going out with Charlotte. Everybody knew stay away from Charlotte Conti because she's going out with Red Gooch. And they went near her. That was me, yeah. If they went near her, I was protective of her. And I don't know how she liked me with I was good looking except for that head of hair. I don't want to get a haircut. Well, anyway, so where am I? I'm with Charlotte, and she was really good. And I went to the Air Force. And I went through my basic training in San Antonio, Texas, 17 and a half. And then they going to send me over to Germany, Wiesbaden, Germany. I'm there and I'm waiting every day to be shipped out, and they're not shipping me out. They're making me do coal and shovel coal and everything. I'm now 17 and a half, so I'm getting bored. And then one night I'm three of my guys, I'm 17 and a half, they make me acting corporal over these 10 guys, not knowing the reason they held us up is that they found the discrepancy possibly in all of our youth. What happened is a lot of the guys that were going over to Germany, young guys, the GIs, were looking for treasure because there was a lot of treasure around it, Nazis and all. I got discharged in 1949, and I married your grandma before I was 20, Marie Polidora. She was 17. I was 19 and a half. We both had to get permission to get married, and we got married. My mother said, why are you getting married? Was there a problem? No. It was just because I want to get married. I don't want to go back to my old neighborhood with the hoodlums. I want to start my career. And that's the next phase of my life.
My name is Anthony LoCascio, Anthony Edward LoCascio. I am Ed's only son, and I was born 2 weeks after his father died. The reason my name is Anthony is because my grandfather was Antonio LoCascio, Anthony LoCascio, and he wanted a grandson named after him. You know, I was never allowed to be lazy. You know, hanging out with my friends, that was for lazy people. We had to work. So not only did he have a demanding job in New York, which amazes me because he drove like every day, you know, from an hour to 2 hours every morning with traffic. I don't know how he did that for 35 years, but he did it. But he wasn't around a lot either because of that demanding job. He sort of had a separate life in New York. So I was kind of left taking care of my mother and sisters a lot of times.
If you could say one last thing to your father, and you could take a moment, that you think would best explain your feelings towards him, what do you think that would be?
You sometimes were, he was, you know, sometimes difficult to be a son, but he did good. He did good.
So now I'm looking for a job, and my brother says you can get a job as a provisional in New York City housing as a laborer. So I wanted a job, and he said then later on you can apply for a civil service job. Anyway, we got this application, and I'm on a civil service list. And the only thing they had was cleaner, like a porter, and I was below my standard, you know. I took a test for assistant superintendent, became the youngest assistant superintendent. I had Wolfside houses, that's where your dad was born. I already had Linda. So now comes I take a test for superintendent, and I passed the test for superintendent. So now I'm the youngest superintendent. And then I became chief. Now the chief part, very interesting saga. I had 16 housing projects in a bad area, maybe indirectly over 1,000 people I supervised directly, indirectly. My official title was Administrative Chief Superintendent of Housing in Brooklyn, Brooklyn South. So I was about 40 years old. I had actually maybe 75,000 families under me. So I was a chief. So now as a chief, you have a lot of prestige and power and contracts and all. And I have to admit, power corrupts, and power corrupts totally. I got very active in political thing. We had the first one was Mario Biaggi, the cop that I told you. He was running for mayor. I was on his committee. The other thing was Mario Cuomo, even though I'm not politically on his wavelength. The original Mario Cuomo, not the governor that's present now. I was the Sons of Italy Venerable, which is the president, and we sponsored a dinner and dance for him for a fundraiser for him to become governor, which he did. Nanny and I were not getting along anymore, so we got divorced, which was really. I lost a lot of things. I had subdivisions, houses, and I gave it to her. I really gave her a generous thing because I felt sorry. We were married 34 years, 35 years. A friend of mine came over to me and said, my son has got a garbage pickup because all the garbage guys were in the rackets. You couldn't be in a garbage business unless you were a mafia guy, you know, connected with them. I had the power to give him stops. You know, the stops was like I put 2 containers on my projects. And they'd give you so much a month. So that was the stop, containers, whatever. So I gave him 3 or 4, and that was a lot. So he would change the containers every week. He would get passes to the dumps, plus get good money. He said, oh, you do me a favor, you do me a favor. My boss wants to take you to lunch, you know? So I said, okay, I don't know who his boss was. So I went to this diner, Lindenwood Diner. These people were part of the Goodfellas. I didn't know at the time. Goodfellas, the movie. You know the guy Paulie in the Goodfellas that they're all afraid of? That was his boss, so he took me to meet his boss, the real Paulie. One time, fooling around with him, we're talking about me and a kid. I said, yeah, when I was growing up, I used to belong to CYO. That was one of them in Brooklyn. I used to go to St. Mary's Church, and I used to box. I said, I was good with my hands. I could take care. So he laughed at it. He said, well, I didn't know who he was. I'm going to send you to the club. You go in at the door, and just imagine a guy like Joey Pesci or the killers in there in this club. You go in there and say, Paulie sent me here, I'm going to go with my hands. You know what they would do? What do you think they would do? Take a gun, you off? Now Jimmy Burke, that Robert De Niro plays, there's a guy in my neighborhood that grew up, his name was Jimmy Burke. And he fits the description of Jimmy Burke in the Goodfellas. Giuliani broke the whole 5 families, mafia, through windows in housing. That was the key. This guy Seward had it, who was really in with the guys making windows. There's millions and millions of dollars involved. His friend was being threatened by a mafia guy. So they come to me, well, if I can help. They figured I was a connected mafia guy. I wasn't. I did go to somebody. This was Pizza City, which is no more there, longer there. The 5 families and their captains would meet there, and I knew the owner. He introduced me to the whole 5 families, caps of 5 families, or their underboss. The 5 families were Gambino, Lucchese, Genovese, the guy Colombo, Bonomo. So now this guy Seward asks me for a favor. So me, you know, big shot, I go to the Pizza City and say, my friend needs somebody has to go with this guy. He's got to meet some guys. He wants to sit down. They need somebody from another family. But that's how they got into the windows. I opened the whole door for them. When I took them there, I was smart enough for my street. I will not get involved. You two guys talk. You can't say I knew what's going on because I walked away and went home. You know what I'm saying? The windows?
Yeah, what was the windows
Oh,
situation?
well, the windows, the government gave millions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars. They're still doing it. Or contractors have to replace all the windows in a housing project. And there's literally millions of windows. You got 1,600 apartments, let's say one project, and you got 15 windows in an apartment, or 10 windows in an apartment. Then times that by $300, then times that by millions. You know what I'm saying? It's millions, so they all got a piece of that. And they all wanted in. But they had it between the families. You take this project, I gotta take that project. When you bid, instead of bidding 120, bid 135, we get $15. They rigged the bids. How Giuliani got onto it, he put a bug in the car, and this is public information, I'm not saying anything else. And Dux Corallo was in charge of the LoCascio family, so Giuliani made himself a hero. So now, I have my boss over me is a guy by the name of Matty Orifice, he's dead. My best friend is Charlie Cino, but they're working in central office. I'm working in the field. And so they have an inspector that they're giving a hard time, a Jewish guy, who I come up there one time and he tells her he liked me. And he said, LoCascio, yeah, calling us up. Hey Ed, I like you, stay away from them. They're under investigation. Don't take anything from nobody this year, there. And I looked at him, I said, why is you telling me this, you know? He's the rat. He went to the FBI and ratted him out. And he liked me. Now this guy spilled the beans to me. I didn't take him serious. But one guy at a Christmas party gave a friend of mine 100 to give to me. Well, I didn't know what it was. I didn't want him to take it. He'll take it, he wants some work, so I said, all right, he wants your permission to go in the project. And all right, so I think it was a big deal. And that's the main count they got me on, 100, taken off him. Everything else they could. Yeah, everything else they couldn't prove. In the meantime, I did make more money, let's not get out. But that's the only proof they had on me. So when they arrested me, I was a target because I was a chief. And they indicted me, but they took almost 14 months to get charges. They had no charges. My friend Matty and Charlie Cino got 5 years each. I got 9 months. On the outskirts, I got involved with these people. I didn't want to, but I did. And I'm lucky I didn't go any further than that. Let's put it that way.
Deborah Ann LoCascio Myers Eisenberger, and Ed is my dad. Ed LoCascio is my pop. I was very little, but I remember we lived in a big house out in the suburbs in North Branch, New Jersey, across from farm fields and everything. And I used to come home, I used to drive, I used to have the suit on, I used to be all sweated, and one day he said, you know, people are looking for me. You know, I gotta be careful. Don't go outside. I was a kid. Don't go outside. Don't ride your bike. Don't do this. You gotta be careful. There was a lot of politics, a lot of dynamics, a lot of rough people. And here's this guy, you know, came from an immigrant family, moved his family out to the safe environment of New Jersey. And I think he was scared. I think, you know, I think that he tried to do the right thing given the circumstance always. I have to say the biggest thing that my father ever said to me, oh, that's tough, is, you know what, you got to try to be happy. You got to try to make yourself happy. Life is tough. And he would tell me his different things, that he always tried to be happy. And that you get old quick. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not that easy, but that's the gist of it. Mm-hmm. That's always what he said.
Pop calls me up one day and asks me to join him for a very special occasion. He has decided to invite the entire family down to Florida to celebrate his 85th birthday with him. The next thing I know, I'm boarding a plane for one last adventure. And so, this was Ed's story. Edward LoCascio of Brooklyn, my grandfather, who traveled many miles and ended his long journey with one single desire: to record his story for his family so his life and his love for them would always be remembered. Pop had one final request. He told me that he'd like to recite 2 prayers that he believed best encompassed his feelings about his life.
Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, harmony. Where there is error, truth. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it's in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to enter life. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.